Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. At a time when the Russian war machine appears to be steadily gaining an upper hand on the battlefield, there was panic in Washington. At this moment as we speak, there are just about 4 nations in the world: the United States, Russia, China and India, who have the capacity to shoot down satellites from space. Everything in the modern world, from communications such as phones, internet, radio and television, to navigation via GPS, to weather forecasting, to banking services, to agriculture, all depend on satellites for their normal functioning. What is now being suspected is that Russia is now developing nuclear anti-satellite weapons, for which the Western world, led by the United States, at this moment has no counter to. So how does a nuclear anti-satellite weapon work? And what advantage do nuclear anti-satellite weapons have over their conventional counterparts? Our next report gets you the details. On the 9th of February, Russia launched its Soyuz 21V rocket from its Plesetsk cosmodrome that is located about 800 kilometers north of Moscow. The Russian space agency, Roscosmos, confirmed that its new military satellite, called Cosmos 2575, had been successfully placed in an orbit. Cosmos 2575 is a surveillance satellite that is used by the Russian military. On the 4th of January this year, the 18th Space Defense Squadron of the United States detected another Russian satellite called the Cosmos 2499, which suddenly disintegrated into 85 pieces of trackable debris. And this newly created space junk is now orbiting at an altitude of 1,169 kilometers above the Earth. This unexpected splintering of the Russian satellite has now sparked a lot of speculation. Cosmos 2499 had originally been launched by Russia in May 2014. And along with Cosmos 2491, the 2 secretive Russian military satellites had performed orbital rendezvous and inspection maneuvers. It was widely speculated back then that the 2 satellites were testing tech that would allow spacecraft to chase down and perhaps even disable other satellites. So what is it about the 9th of February launch by Russia that has now sparked a panic in Washington?
I think the Department of Defense today has indicated that what we're discussing is a Russian anti-satellite weapon. I do know that the administration has the belief that along this way they're going to be releasing additional information about that. But in the interim, I've got great faith in what the administration is currently doing to try to address this matter.
It is not any ordinary Russian anti-satellite weapon that has created a flutter in the West. What is now widely being speculated is the possibility that Russia is developing nuclear anti-satellite weapon systems. Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 bans nuclear weapons from being put into orbit, from being installed on celestial bodies, or otherwise be stationed in outer space. The Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963 even bars the testing of nuclear weapons in outer space. Washington initially tried to downplay the fears.
I know that Chairman Turner's letter to House members and his subsequent post on social media about a national security threat has prompted a lot of questions. While I am limited by how much I can share about the specific nature of the threat, I can confirm that it is related to an anti-satellite capability that Russia is developing. This is not an active capability that's been deployed. And though Russia's pursuit of this particular capability is troubling, there is no immediate threat to anyone's safety.
But eventually, the President of the United States of America was forced to come forth and make a statement.
First of all, there is no nuclear threat to the people of America or anywhere else in the world with what Russia is doing at the moment, number one. Number two, anything that they're doing or they will do relates to satellites and space and damaging those satellites potentially. Number three, there is no evidence that they have made a decision to go forward with doing anything in space either.
On the 15th of November in 2021, Just 3 months before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Moscow had tested a new type of anti-satellite weapon system called New Dawn that was then described as unlike anything that had been tested by any other nation. What Russia destroyed in the test was a defunct Soviet-era satellite called Cosmos 1408. This was a pretty big satellite that weighed almost 1,750 kilograms. These satellite images, captured by Numerica, a Colorado-based company that tracks space debris, will give you a glimpse of the before and after images of the destruction of the satellite. According to experts, satellites zip around in their orbits around the Earth at a staggering speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour. A collision with a conventional anti-satellite weapon would smash a satellite to smithereens. And to use nuclear anti-satellite weapons would clearly be an overkill. Four Armenian soldiers were killed and another was wounded by Azerbaijani fire along the two countries' heavily militarized border on the 13th of February. Baku claimed that the attack on the Armenian position was in retaliation to an Armenian provocation just a day earlier, in which one Azerbaijani soldier had been wounded. Now, Tuesday's flare-up in violence was the first one since the Caucasus Arch Force began negotiating a deal last year to end more than 3 decades of intermittent warfare. A couple of days after the border skirmish, the Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan warned that Azerbaijan is planning another full-scale war on Armenia. Both the nations have professed an interest in signing a peace treaty, but they continue to disagree over many issues, including the precise demarcation of their borders and also the control over several smaller territorial enclaves. Our next report explores.
Nagorno-Karabakh has been at the center of a decades-long territorial dispute between the Caucasus arch foes Armenia and Azerbaijan. 2 wars have been fought over the mountainous territory in the past 3 decades. Home to about 120,000 ethnic Armenians, the disputed region came under the control of ethnic Armenian forces in separatist fighting that ended in 1994. Substantial territory around the Azerbaijani region was also taken under control by the Armenian forces. But Azerbaijan wrested control of the surrounding territory in a 6-week war with Armenia in 2020. And in September last year, Azerbaijan, in a lightning offensive, recaptured Nagorno-Karabakh, prompting a rapid exodus of the region's ethnic Armenian population. What followed was a renowned push from both sides for a peace deal to end the conflict. Recent months were a period of relative calm, with rekindled hopes of a long-lasting resolution to this more than 30-year conflict. But on Tuesday, the first fatal incident since the negotiations began, Yerevan accused its neighbor of trying to escalate tensions.
Again, Azerbaijan, in unprovoked way, killed 4 soldiers from Armenian side and wounded 1 soldier. This is information right now that we have. And I can tell you that this is another threat to the peace process, because when we are talking about peace, when we are talking about peace process and negotiations, and Azerbaijan is attacking sovereign Armenian territories, and by the way, these attacks were carried out, according to my information, from the sovereign Armenian territory, which was occupied by the Azerbaijani forces. So just being there is provocation.
The 4 Armenian soldiers were killed and wounded at a combat post near the southern Armenian village of Nerkinhand in the Syunik province. In response, Baku reiterated its commitment to the peace process and said it had no intention of escalating tensions further.
Today, Armenian Foreign Ministry has claimed that the measures undertaken by Azerbaijan as a retaliatory measure against the armed forces of Armenia as a result of yesterday's attacks is an escalation, an intended escalation by Azerbaijan, which is not true. Azerbaijan took these measures as a result of the provocations by the Armenian side. Azerbaijan is committed to the peace process.
The timing of the attack is interesting, as it comes on the heels of Azerbaijan's president Ilham Aliyev winning a 5th term in office. Local commentators are of the opinion that an emboldened Aliyev might consider further military action to seize Armenian territory. Moscow, formally allied to Armenia, but which also has close ties with Azerbaijan, has urged both parties to exercise restraint. Russian peacekeepers are stationed in Karabakh and are due to leave the region next year. Though Moscow would like to maintain presence in the area, Armenia has, of late, distanced itself from Russia and deepened ties with the European Union, which has resulted in the souring of relations between Azerbaijan and EU. Will this recent conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan destabilize efforts to end a 30-year conflict? Only time will tell.
One person was killed and at least 21 others, including children, were wounded in a mass shooting attack at the Kansas City Chiefs Victory Parade in Kansas City, Missouri on Valentine's Day. 3 people, 2 of whom were juveniles, were taken into custody in connection with the shooting. Interestingly, the American police was quick to rule out any nexus to terrorism or homegrown violent extremism and said that this incident of mass shooting was the result of a personal altercation that quickly escalated. America once again was left stunned, paranoid and grieving. This is the 49th incident of mass shooting in America just this year. With more guns than inhabitants, the United States has the highest rate of gun deaths in any developed nation. The surveys have established that 57% of the Americans are actually in favor of stricter gun laws. But the Republicans, the staunch defenders of America's constitutional right to bear arms, have repeatedly for years opposed any effort to tighten gun control measures. Our next report gets you more details.
America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, was jolted this past Wednesday by yet another mass shooting. Gunshots rang out as Kansas City celebrated the victory of the Kansas City Chiefs in America's biggest sporting event, the final of the National Football League. Moments after jubilant Chiefs players addressed the vast cheering crowd of thousands of red-shirted fans, the gunfire erupted, sending shocked and terrified fans and VIPs fleeing in a tragic end to an exhilarating and unifying event.
And we were headed back to the direction where the Uber had dropped us off when all of a sudden people started crushing forward. Everybody started running. There was screaming. We didn't know what was happening, but this day and age when people run, you run. And so I put my arms around her and we tried to push through so people wouldn't run on top of us. And there was a woman crying, saying something about somebody had been shot. Of course, it's hard to know, is it a singular incident or is there an active shooter? But we got pushed all the way up to Union Station where they had gated everything off so you couldn't get in for the Chiefs. And everybody started jumping the rails and pushing everybody over. We got inside and we thought that, okay, it's calm now. We're inside, we'll be safe.
As hundreds of police guarding the event rushed to clear the area, some of the victims were seen being treated lying on the ground before being carried away on stretchers. Reportedly, many of the victims have sustained life-threatening injuries. Half of them are believed to be under the age of 16. As many as 800 law enforcement officials were at the rally and the parade that preceded it, including FBI agents and the agents of Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives. Authorities blame the incident, despite such security measures, on the presence of a few bad actors with guns.
I'm angry at what happened today. The people who came to this celebration should expect a safe environment. We had over 800 law enforcement officers, Kansas City and other agencies, at the location to keep everyone safe. Because of bad actors, which were very few, this tragedy occurred, even in the presence of uniformed law enforcement officers, who again ran towards them and took them into custody.
The US President Joe Biden issued a rallying call yet again for Americans to back his pleas for Congress to enact gun reform. United States, a gun-obsessed nation of 330 million people, is awash with about 400 million guns. It has the highest per capita gun ownership in the world, with 120.5 firearms per 100 people. Guns have been woven into the very fabric of American culture and politics. And despite the fact that more than 50 people are killed each day by a firearm in the United States, the political paralysis endures. The threat of mass shooting has become a very real concern in everyday life. The land of the free is besieged with a palpable sense of insecurity and vulnerability. Will this tragedy resonate in the US Congress and lead to the final solution of stricter gun laws?
In a historic decision on the 15th of February, Senegal's Constitutional Council overturned the postponement of this month's presidential election. The landmark decision opened up a realm of uncertainty for the traditionally stable West African nation. President Macky Sall's decision earlier in the month to postpone the election, scheduled for the 25th of February, had sparked widespread outcry and had prompted deadly protests. Reportedly, at least about 3 people were killed during the protests, and at least about 266 others were arrested across the country, including journalists. Our next report gets you the details.
Senegal is considered one of the most stable democracies in West Africa. It is the only country in mainland West Africa to have never had a military coup. It has largely peaceful handovers of power since gaining independence from France in 1960 and has never delayed a presidential election. Its laudable reputation, though, was marred on the 3rd of February by President Macky Sall's postponement of the country's 25th February presidential election.
I signed Decree 2024-106 of 3rd February 2024, repealing Decree 2024-2283 of 29th November 2023, convening the electoral body. For my part, my solemn undertaking not to stand in the presidential election remains unchanged. I will initiate an open national dialogue to create the conditions for free, transparent and inclusive elections in a Senegal that is at peace and reconciled.
President Macky Sall cited concerns over the eligibility of opposition candidates as the reason for pushing back the elections to the 15th of December. Opposition figures cried foul, lamenting that the unprecedented move amounted to a constitutional coup. Senegalese parliament, after a fiery debate, approved the delay till mid-December, but only after the security forces had stormed the building and removed the opposition MPs opposing the bill from the chamber. Widespread protests gripped the nation, once considered a bastion of democracy. Amid escalating tensions, scores of government opponents were arrested. In an apparent attempt to appease public opinion, several detainees were released on the 15th of February.
As I walked through the door, I can say that, well, there were feelings of sadness because I left my comrades behind. And even though I'm happy on the one hand, on the other, I can say I'm sad because there are comrades I have left behind. And we demand their immediate and unconditional release. And we demand once again that Macky Sall organize elections as quickly as possible. He must leave on April 2nd.
International community, fearing more violent unrest, have called on the Senegalese government to hold elections as soon as possible.
We are extremely concerned about the situation in Senegal, the political situation in Senegal. In fact, the Secretary spoke to the President of Senegal this morning to reiterate our concern about the situation there and to make quite clear that we want to see elections continued as they were scheduled. We want to see them take place as soon as possible.
Opposition and civil society groups, still guarded, have issued new calls for demonstrations. Will President Sall read the writing on the wall and ensure smooth and timely transition of power, avoiding fueling further instability? Only time will tell.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me on the ID that you're seeing on the screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.